Welcome. In this video, we're going to continue to explore chapter 11 of the book of Daniel. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the death of Antiochus IV. Before we launch into the content here, can I just take a moment to thank my patrons who make these videos possible? Remember, the goal of this channel is to create a library of videos that objectively analyze the Bible. If that's something you consider important, can I encourage you to become a patron today? If you do so, you will receive access to all my full videos. All right, let's now get back into the content now. So in our previous video, we reviewed the procession of Daphne in 166, then Antiochus's Eastern campaign in 165. Now in 164, Antiochus will die in the East. And we have quite a few sources for this event. We have 1 Maccabees, Josephus, Polybius, Appian, and the cuneiform tablet BM 35603. Let's begin by analyzing the tablet. We've actually already analyzed this tablet very thoroughly in a previous video. So here, we're only going to concern ourselves with the very last line, which reads, quote, year 148 Kislevu, it was heard that Antiochus IV, the king, died, end quote. Commenting on this, an author writes the following, quote, from the cuneiform tablet, British Museum 35603, we learn that Antiochus's death took place in the 8th or 9th month of the Seleucid Babylonian year 148. That is, around November-December of 164 BC, end quote. So this tablet gives us a date for when Antiochus dies, but doesn't give us any details around how he died. So let's now turn to our other sources. We can divide them into two groups, the Jewish sources and the pagan sources. Now, historians will contend that the pagan sources give us a more objective and historically accurate picture of the events, as our Jewish sources do tend to be a bit more biased. So let's begin by considering our pagan sources. Before we read through them, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of them. So in 165 BC, Antiochus makes an eastern expedition to put down the revolt of Artaxerxes. In order to fund this expedition, Antiochus decides to raid a temple in Ulmas, which is in southern Iran today. So Antiochus heads down there to go plunder this temple. However, the inhabitants of Ulmas fight back and defeat Antiochus. Thus, Antiochus retreats to Tabai, and it's in Tabai where he actually dies. We aren't really given any specifics about how he dies. Did he suffer an injury in the siege of the temple? Possibly. We simply aren't told. It's also very interesting to remember that Antiochus IV's father, Antiochus III, actually died in an almost identical manner 23 years prior. He too tried to lay siege to a temple in Ulmas, probably not the exact same temple, and the people of Ulmas killed Antiochus III. So here we have history repeating itself, which is very interesting. Guerra, in his book, gives us a summary of Antiochus IV's death. Quote, the next and last appearance of Antiochus Epiphanes is recorded for the year 164 BC. The king demanded that the treasures of the temple of Artemis in Ulmas be handed over to him. The local inhabitants would not permit such a violation, and Antiochus, not wishing to impose his wishes by force, retired upcountry to a place named Tabai, where he died. End quote. In an article published in 2019, Overton writes the following, quote, in 165, Antiochus IV recognized the renewed aggression of the Parthians as a serious threat and closely followed the example of his father, Antiochus III, in preparing his eastern campaign. In need of money to finance his own major eastern expedition, and perhaps motivated by a desire to avenge the violent death of his father, Antiochus IV chose to attempt to plunder a temple in southwestern Iran. Antiochus IV's assault faced similar stiff resistance and ended in abysmal failure. Antiochus did not die in the attack like his father. However, his failure in southwestern Iran derailed his eastern expedition. He lacked the money and no longer had the men to attack the Parthians immediately. Although the cause is much debated in the sources, Antiochus suddenly died, likely from disease near Gabai, modern Isfahan, Iran, in late 164 while trying to salvage his eastern campaign. End quote. Okay, let's now actually read our pagan sources for ourselves. We're going to begin with Appian, who, before describing the death of Antiochus, gives us a quick summary of his reign. Quote, Antiochus IV reigned not quite 12 years, in the course of which he captured Artaxerxes the Armenian and made an expedition into Egypt against Ptolemy, who had been left an orphan with one brother. He continues to write, while Antiochus was encamped near Alexandria, Pompilius came to him as Roman ambassador, bringing an order in writing that he should not attack the Ptolemies. When he read it, he replied that he would think about it. Pompilius drew a circle around him with a stick and said, think about it there. We continue to read. He was terrified and withdrew from the country and robbed the temple of Venus Ilmas. Then he died of a wasting disease, leaving a 9-year-old son, the Antiochus Eupator, already mentioned in 164. End quote. Our next pagan source is Polybius, who writes the following about his death. Quote, in Syria, King Antiochus, wishing to provide himself with money, decided to make an expedition against the sanctuary of Artemis in Ilmas. On reaching the spot, he was foiled in his hopes, as the barbarian tribes who dwelt in the neighborhood would not permit the outrage. And on his retreat, he died at Tabai in Persia, smitten with madness. As some people say, owing to a certain manifestation of divine displeasures when he was attempting this outrage on the above sanctuary. End quote. So here, what Polybius is reporting is this common belief at the time that Antiochus died because the gods were angry that he tried to desecrate the temple in Ilmas. And that's going to be something important to remember when we begin to read Josephus. Okay, so those are our pagan sources for the death of Antiochus. We're now going to turn to our Jewish sources, which is 1st Maccabees and Josephus. Now, are you enjoying this video so far? Do you want to watch the rest of it? Well, the only way for you to do that is to become a patron. The full video is only available to patrons. So click the link in the description below and become a patron today.